Chapter 21 of the Boy Scouts in the Blue Ridge. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Kenneth Sergeant Gaghan. The Boy Scouts in the Blue Ridge by Herbert Carter. Chapter 21. Be Prepared. Wow! It was Bumpus who gave utterance to this exclamation, though possibly he hardly realized himself that he was saying anything as he stood there and gaped at the sight of the wounded mountaineer being helped along into their camp. But if Bumpus and some of the others were spellbound by what they saw, gazing as though fascinated at the blood dripping from the man's fingers, Thad Brewster was not included in this group. Thad had long ago picked up a smattering of knowledge connected with a surgeon's duties, and ever since taking up the new life of a Boy Scout, those things which concerned the saving of human life had somehow appealed to young Thad with redoubled force. More than once now he had been called upon to show what he knew along those lines. A boy had been severely cut by an axe he was carelessly wielding in camp, and he might have bled to death only for the energetic actions of Thad, who knew just how to secure a stout bandana handkerchief around above the wound, with the knot pressing in on the artery, and making a tourniquet by passing a stick through the folds of the rude bandage, twisted until bleeding was temporarily stopped, and the boy could be taken to a doctor. Another time it had been a case of near drowning, when Thad, who had learned his lesson well, succeeded in exercising the lad's arms after laying him on his chest and pressing his knee upon him, until he had started the lungs to working. In that case every one of the other scouts declared that only for those prompt applications of scout knowledge the unfortunate one would surely have died. And so, when he saw that the man was being thus supported into their camp had been shot in the arm and was in danger of bleeding to death, the surgeon instinct in Thad Brewster came immediately to the surface. He never once thought about the fact that the man was probably one of the very lawless moonshiners, whose presence all around had virtually marooned himself and his chums in the heart of the mountains. He was a man in trouble, and perhaps Thad could be of some help. And so the generous-hearted boy sprang forward, eager to lend a hand. "Bring him right up to the fire, men!" he exclaimed. "What happened to him? Was he shot? We heard a gun go off a little while ago, and wondered what it meant." The two men urged their injured companion forward. He seemed to have little mind of his own in the matter, though Thad could see that his jaw was set, and apparently determined to betray no sign of weakness in this terrible hour. The customary grit of the North Carolina mountaineer was there, without fail. It showed in the clenched hand, the grim look on his weather-beaten face, as well as those tightly closed teeth. "It warn't an accident," almost fiercely replied one of the men, whom Thad now recognized as a fellow whom they had met driving the vehicle that Bob declared had kegs of illicit Mountain Dew hidden under the straw. "Nate Busby. We were walking the woods when a twig caught the trigger of my gun, and she hit Cliff in the arm, making a bad hurt. Reckons how I never could hold out till we get him across to the doctor's cabin." "You could if we managed to stop the bleeding," said Thad eagerly. "Bring him over here and let me take a look, men. I've done a little something that way, and perhaps you don't know it, but all Boy Scouts are taught to shut off the flow of blood. There, set him down and help me get his coat off. There's no time to lose." "Nope, there's no time to lose," muttered the wretched Nate, who was undoubtedly feeling very keenly the fact that it had been his gun that had been discharged through the accident, causing all this trouble, and that if a man died, his relatives might even want to hold the unlucky owner of that weapon in account for his carelessness, inexcusable in one who was mountain born and bred. They sat the wounded man down gently, as though he had been a baby, after which Nate assisted Thad in taking the ragged coat off. Some of the scouts crowded close, though with white faces, for the sight of blood is always enough to send a cold chill into the hearts of the unaccustomed of the spectacle. But Allan was an exception, and strangely enough, there was Smithy, whom no one would ever expect to show the least bit of nerve, evidently ready to lend the amateur surgeon a helping hand if he called for recruits. It often takes a sudden emergency call like this to show what is under the veneer surface of the boy. Smithy has always been deemed rather effeminate, yet he could stand a sight that sent the cold shivers chasing up and down the spines of such fellows as Giraffe, Davy Jones, and Step Hen, and almost completely upset poor Bumpus. "Get me one of those stout bandages I brought along, Allan, please," said Thad, when he could see that the terrible nature of the wound was "you know where they are. And Smithy, will you hand me that stick yonder?" In a brief space of time the several articles were at the service of the boy, who first of all made a good-sized knot in the handkerchief, after wrapping it around the man's arm above the wound, and then, inserting the stout stick, he began twisting the same vigorously. Must have pained tremendously, but not a whimper, not a semblance of a groan did they hear from the bearded lips of the wounded mountaineer. Indeed, he seemed to arouse himself sufficiently to watch the confident operations of the young surgeon with a rising curiosity. And Thad he could detect a slight smile on his dark face. As for Nate and the other rough man, they started as though unable to believe their eyes. To thus see a mere boy so wonderfully able to do what was necessary in the case of life and death. Every little movement did they follow with rapt attention. No doubt, a great leap had already commenced to rise up in the heart of Nate, as hope again took hold upon him. If the other survived the shock and loss of blood, it would not be so bad, and trouble may not come to him on account of his liability for the accident. Thad soon known that he had done the right thing. The knot had been properly placed, so the pressure upon the artery above the wound prevented any more blood being pumped that way by the excited action of the man's heart. "There," he remarked in a satisfied way, "I guess we've got the bleeding held up, and you can get him to the doctor. As you say, there is one across the valley. I'm going to bind this stick so it can't come loose while you're helping him along. But if it should, perhaps you've seen how I did the job, and you could fix it again." "Sure," replied Nate, "and you done it neatest I ever known, younker. Reckon as how Cliff Dorie and me has reason to be glad with you being so close. If so he lives through this hit as he will now, dead certain he's gonna owe his life to you." Thad happened to catch a glimpse of Bob's face just then, and as the other rushed toward him, for up to now he had been keeping rather aloof, not wishing to be noticed by either of the mountain men, he was surprised to see the expression of suddenly renewed hope that seemed to have taken up its abiding place there. Apparently the Southern boy had made a pleasing discovery, which of course Thad could only guess at until he found a chance to speak to his comrade. But he understood readily enough that it must concern the coming of the three men, and the fact of the scouts being able to place them under obligations. With the flow of blood stopped, the wounded man seemed to gather new energy. He no doubt felt that he had at least a fair chance to pull through. He started to get on his feet, seeing which Thad immediately offered his hand to help him, and the mountaineer's horny palm was confidently thrust into the smaller one. After what miracle he had already seen the lad perform, the men were willing to trust him in anything. Yes, fortune again had been kind to the scout, only in this instance it had not been a case of searching for chances to do good. The opportunity had come knocking at their very door, so that all was necessary was them to be prepared, just as the scout's motto signifies, and then do the best they knew how. Again did the two men take hold of their stricken comrade. Before they quit the vicinity of the fire, however, the man named Nate Busby turned and shook hands all around. Evidently he was grateful for the assistance rendered. To his mind this first aid to the injured meant a whole lot, and while he did not say a single word, his action was enough to show what he thought. Then the group departed, heading toward the other side of the valley, where, in one of those humble cabins, some sort of mountain doctor was to be found. Rude in his ways, no doubt, but perfectly capable of attending to a gunshot wound, for these doubtless constituted the bulk of calls that were made upon his services. When they were gone, the scouts began to discuss the queer happening and compare notes as to which of them had shown the least alarm. Bob Quail came over directly to Allan and Thad where they were standing, just as the latter had expected he would do. That expression of eager anticipation still shone upon his dark face, and his eyes fairly glowed with satisfaction. "Well, will wonders ever stop?" he said, as he reached the others. "Did you hear what Nate called the wounded man, Thad and Allan?" "Yes, it was Cliff Dorie, and I guess you've heard it before, judging from the way you act," observed the scoutmaster. "Talk about luck! Why, we're just swimming neck deep in it," the other continued. "I thought he looked a little like somebody I'd known before, and when I heard that name, I knew it. Why, Cliff Dorie is the brother of old Finn's wife." "Fine!" exclaimed Allan, with a broad smile. "I should say yes," Bob went on eagerly. "Seems as though we were just bound to put the whole Daddy family in our debt. It was old Finn himself who felt so interested in all you told him about the Boy Scout movement. Then there was Polly, who might have had her face badly scratched, not to mention other wounds, if we hadn't just happened to get there in time to chase that savage mother bobcat off. And now you've gone to save the life of Polly's own uncle. Oh, perhaps we won't have to get into any fuss at all about that prisoner of the still. Perhaps old Finn may feel that we've done his family enough good to change his mind about keeping that revenue man up there any longer, or working his life out, and let him go away with us if he promises never to tell anything he learned. And let me say to you both, I'm feeling something right here. Inside, there's something to tell me it's going to be all right. All right." And Bob repeated those last two words softly, caressingly, as though they meant everything in the wide world to him. End of chapter 21. Recording by Kenneth Sergeant Gaghan.